Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving deep into something we literally all struggle with at some point, the profound psychology and the actual practical frameworks of how to hold people accountable. And we're going to look at how to do this without sacrificing their dignity or, our own sanity. We'll be exploring the fascinating ways our brains react to conflict and how we can completely rewire our communication to be both fiercely compassionate and deeply effective. Okay, let's take a quick look at our roadmap. We're covering the illusion of kindness, the science of behavior, the radical candor matrix, communication formulas that actually work, navigating intimate conflict, and finally, 3 protocols for daily life. Let's get right into it. So, we often think that biting our tongue or withholding criticism makes us a nice person, right? We let things slide. But is your kindness actually causing systemic harm? It's a tough question, but we really need to examine why avoiding conflict might actually be the most destructive thing you can do to someone you care about. Section 1. The illusion of kindness. The perils of ruinous empathy. Well, organizational psychologists point to this really fascinating concept called ruinous empathy. Basically, it means you care personally about someone, but you completely fail to challenge them directly. Think of the metaphor from that old Russian anecdote about the misguided pet owner. He needs to amputate his dog's tail, but to avoid causing one big moment of pain, he decides to cut it off an inch a day. It's awful, right? Or a more common example, think about noticing a colleague has a massive piece of spinach in their teeth. If you stay silent just to spare them a quick moment of immediate awkwardness, you're actually forcing them to go through multiple subsequent meetings completely unaware. Delaying the feedback doesn't eliminate the pain, it literally multiplies the suffering and the embarrassment. Picture this. You have an owner who loves their dog deeply, but they absolutely avoid enforcing any discipline. This total lack of boundaries leads to the dog bolting into a busy street, nearly getting hit by a speeding taxi. Suddenly, a complete stranger steps in, gestures firmly, and commands the out-of-control dog to sit, and the dog immediately complies. Now, the stranger wasn't being hostile at all. They were using direct assertiveness as a fundamental act of protection. The big takeaway here, clarity and direct challenge are actually the ultimate expressions of genuine care. Section 2, the science of behavior. Decoupling the person from the action. To truly fix interpersonal conflict, we first have to understand the root of challenging behavior. And here is the core rule you need to remember. Bad behavior is rarely random, and it's rarely malicious. Psychological research tells us that it is almost always a functional, maladaptive strategy to meet unmet needs, manage acute stress, or just establish safety. We have to decouple or separate the inherent worth of the human being from their surface-level actions. So why exactly does this happen? Well, when a person's nervous system senses an emotional or relational threat, the amygdala fires up. This instantly kicks off a stress response before the rational thinking part of the brain, the prefrontal cortex, can even intervene. In this state of complete physiological overwhelm, the individual literally loses access to higher-order thinking and emotional regulation. This is exactly what leads to those defensive outbursts, the hostility, or the total withdrawal we see during arguments. They aren't sitting there plotting against you. Their brain has literally been hijacked. We can actually see how the stress response plays out depending on the environment. Take unconditional positive regard. This means valuing someone inherently despite their behavior. Doing this actually lowers their defensive physiological responses because it activates the brain's social engagement system. It creates safety and an openness to feedback. On the flip side, we have conditional regard, which sends the message, I only value you when you perform well. This instantly triggers those threat response systems, creating high anxiety, a lot of defensiveness, and a huge tendency for people to hide their mistakes. Section 3. The Radical Candor Matrix. Balancing care and challenge. Okay, so how do we actually hold high standards without destroying that unconditional positive regard we just talked about? Well, if you challenge someone highly but you show very low personal care, you land in what's called obnoxious aggression. These are harsh personal attacks that provoke instant resistance. Now, if you have low care and low challenge, you get manipulative insincerity, which is basically passive-aggressive backstabbing. We already discussed ruinous empathy, where you have high care but low challenge. So true compassion actually lies right in the top right quadrant, radical candor. This is where we balance deep personal care with unyielding clarity on behavioral standards. Section 4, communication formulas that work. Practical toolkits for assertiveness. All right, let's dive into the actual linguistic mechanics of all this. When we compare communication styles, being passive prioritizes others entirely at your own expense. Being aggressive prioritizes you at the expense of everyone else. Assertive communication is really the only style that balances both parties' needs equally. It's built heavily on nonviolent communication principles, and it uses protective force to preserve boundaries and maintain safety, rather than using punitive force just to assign blame or punish someone's character. So, here's a highly effective structural formula to achieve that empathetic assertiveness. It's called the LACE script. L stands for listen to their position. A is for acknowledge and name their specific feelings. C means communicate your boundary clearly. And E is for explain a brief, factual reason for that boundary. Now, for relational disputes, you can also lean on the ERPG model, which is empathy, respect, problem, and goal. And for immediate feedback, there's the XYZ formula, which is fantastic for anchoring the conversation in objective reality rather than relying on character attacks. The ultimate goal here is to move from heated arguments to values-aligned discussions. Now, for leadership and the workplace specifically, we have the Lotus framework. This brilliantly reconciles that massive tension between driving hard performance and supporting employee well-being. Leaders really need to learn to view behavior as unmet needs, optimize their feedback routines, transform performance management, utilize personal development, and strengthen the culture by courageously and proactively stepping into conflicts. You can't just magically mandate high performance, right? You absolutely have to foster the environment that allows for it to happen organically. This next part is a real game changer. We need a fundamental shift in our daily vocabulary. Take a phrase like, "You should stay late because we have to finish this." That's obligation language. It instantly triggers resistance and feels highly accusatory. Compare that to empowered language. "I choose to commit extra time to this and would appreciate your support if your schedule permits." Do you hear the difference? It replaces passive or demanding phrasing with collaborative, assertive language that empowers the other person rather than forcing them. And if you work in sales or client relations, you know exactly what it's like when a customer's nervous system is highly emotional. For those moments, you can use the HEARD protocol. First, hear them out completely without interrupting. Just let them vent. Then, empathize with their emotion, apologize for their experience, and note that you can do this without necessarily blaming the company. Resolve the issue by offering actionable choices, which gives them back a sense of control. And finally, diagnose the root cause internally later. Pairing this with the classic feel, felt, found technique is an amazing way to safely de-escalate tension before you even start problem solving. Section 5. Navigating Intimate Conflict. Dr. John Gottman's 4 Horsemen. Let's be real. Preserving connection under the stress of domestic life is arguably our hardest challenge. Notice the chronological descent of relationship conflict here. According to research, this progression predicts relationship failure with over 90% accuracy. It all starts with criticism, a character attack, like saying, "You never do this." That inevitably triggers defensiveness, where a partner plays the victim or counterattacks. If that goes unchecked, it breeds contempt, the sarcasm, the eye-rolling, the acting superior. Contempt is actually the most lethal predictor of a breakup. Finally, the nervous system completely overloads, leading to stonewalling, which is total physiological shutdown and withdrawal from the conversation. But don't worry, there is a fix. To stop this spiral, we have to apply specific antidotes. We replace criticism with a gentle startup, using clear, objective I statements. We disarm defensiveness by stepping up and taking even partial responsibility for the issue at hand. We cure contempt by actively building a culture of appreciation and gratitude in the relationship every single day. And we combat stonewalling by mutually agreeing to take structured breaks. This gives both partners the time to allow their bodies to physiologically self-regulate and just calm down. Section 6. 3 protocols for daily life. Integration and action. Protocol 1 is the physical pause, and it's absolutely crucial. When your blood pressure spikes out there in the real world, your amygdala has taken over. You must interrupt that hijack. So, take 60 seconds. Inhale for 4 seconds, hold for 4, exhale for 6. Just doing this re-engages your prefrontal cortex. Once you're actually calm, you can move to the next step, which is an empathy, assertiveness, empathy sequence. You validate their reality, you state your boundary clearly, and you invite collaborative problem solving. Another vital protocol is the compassion and accountability checklist. Before any confrontation, whether it's a tense performance review or a domestic dispute at home, run through this quick mental checklist. First, the value metric. Have I affirmed their inherent worth? Next, the capability metric. Am I treating them as capable of solving this, or am I accidentally disempowering them by trying to rescue them? And finally, the responsibility metric. Have I clearly defined exactly who is responsible for what? So what does this all mean for us? The absolutely crucial point to leave you with today is this. True compassion isn't about being passive. It's not about avoiding difficult conversations just to keep the peace. It is about having the courage to protect boundaries and relationships simultaneously. We must separate the person from the behavior, creating a space of unconditional positive regard while holding firm to our standards. So think about your relationships today. Will you choose the momentary comfort of silence, or will you choose the courageous compassion of accountability? Where will you draw your line today? Thanks so much for exploring this with us.